Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you very quickly about manufacturing on a world scale. So we know about the factories in Ireland, we know about Intel Ireland in Leixlip, we know about Ahinish, Rusal Ahinish in Limerick. We know that there's factories in England and France and Germany and America. But I suppose on a world scale, are they all the same? Is there manufacturing everywhere? We'll go through it. So across the world, manufacturing is not at the same level everywhere. So if you have a quick look at the map in front of you, it shows manufacturing on a world scale and it divides it into 3 regions, okay? So we divide the world according to the following 3 regions when we talk about manufacturing. The first region is the industrialised regions. So they're the regions that have factories set up with centuries. So England, France, etc. Wealthy regions, ourselves even. Newly industrialised countries. So you're thinking the likes of China, Vietnam, many parts of Asia and South America. Okay, that have just set them up in recent times. Labour is very cheap, but they make a lot of our products for us. Industrially emergent regions then are regions with little or no manufacturing. So it could be because of very poor roads, because of wars, so you're talking about places of Africa. Okay, so let's go through them into small bits of detail. So industrialised regions. So they're long established, so they were probably the first countries to ever start up a manufacturing industries. They have very skilled labour, so access to skilled graduates. Look at Ireland with Intel Ireland, access to skilled engineering and science graduates from Dublin and Maynooth universities. Plenty of capital. So like we're living in Western Europe, we've plenty of money in our countries to set up the factories. Like we've plenty of skilled labour. We can get loans from banks. We've good investors. We do produce high value industrial goods. Like with a lot of the factories that we have left in our countries, when I say left, a lot of the very, very cheaper ones moved to the cheaper locations to produce cheap goods. But a lot of the ones that we have left, a lot of the factories that we've left in our countries produce high value goods. So when you look at Rusal Ahinish, they're making alumina. That's going to make aluminium. There's a good price for that. When you look at Intel Ireland, they're producing microchips. They're very expensive. So they've high value. However, they no longer dominate world manufacturing as they once did. So basically, we've seen in the last number of years, a lot of factories are moving to cheaper locations. But we still do have a lot of manufacturing in the rich world in our countries. Okay, so if you have a look at the map again, the same one I showed you earlier, it just shows you manufacturing in regions such as, we'll say, the United States, it spans across Europe ourselves, Australia. Okay, so we've a lot of regions that are industrialised regions. So we've a lot of factories. We probably were one of the first ones to set up the factories. We've skilled labour. We produce high value goods, and we still have a lot of manufacturing going on. I suppose, when does this date back to in our regions? It actually started, setting up of factories, I imagine, started in Britain in 1780. They were the first ones in the world to start up manufacturing over in Britain. So back in 1780. Which is such a long time ago. So they started up the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution was the start-up of factories across Britain to start manufacturing and making goods. Now you might say to yourself, what did we do before then? How did we manufacture goods? You didn't really manufacture goods before 1780. You just had a very, very agricultural world. You went out on the farm, you worked, you fed yourselves, and things were very, very basic. So the Industrial Revolution was the start-up of many factories across Britain in 1780. And then it quickly spread to other countries. So you can see there in the map that the red, the United Kingdom, was the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. So they really were the ones to start up manufacturing. Then it quickly spread to France and Germany. Then it went to, we'll say, Russia, Italy, Norway, Sweden, etc. And then it went on to Portugal, Spain, etc. in the years following that. So it really, really spread across Europe and the European regions very quickly. By 1900, bearing in mind now that it started in Britain in 1780, so by 1900, USA and Japan were rapidly industrialising. So look at your map there and look over to Europe again on the right-hand side, top right-hand corner. That's where the birthplace of manufacturing was, and how quickly then over the next century it spread over to North America and it spread over to Japan. So you're looking across the northern half of the map, so the rich north. So the developed countries were the industrialised regions. So today, Western Europe, Japan and the USA still dominate world manufacturing. Now this is an interesting, chart here. It shows the top 10 countries by share of global manufacturing output in 2018. So China is the top. I don't think that comes as a surprise to any of us, to be totally honest, because most factories are located there because of the cheap labour. The US comes next. Sure, it's a massive location. It has to come big in manufacturing. Followed by Japan. They would make very high value goods. They're a very, very good developed country. Germany, South Korea, India, Italy, France, the UK. Okay, so we do have a lot of Europe and USA and Japan. We still feature heavily in manufacturing, even though China definitely leads. However, many MNCs, MNCs, I think you should know this word already, multinational corporations. These are factory businesses that can locate in many countries. So many MNCs are relocating to cheaper locations such as Asia and Latin America, down in South America. Why? Because of the cheaper labour, of course. So just a quick recap. We are industrialised regions up in the rich north, the developed countries. We have a strong presence of manufacturing in our regions. When did it begin? Back in 1780, it started in Britain. It quickly spread to other European countries. Then it spread to the USA and Japan. We still dominate manufacturing. However, we have a lot of multinational corporations and factories choosing to relocate to cheaper cost locations. Okay, the next category then are newly industrialised countries. So these are countries in the south or in the developing world that have been manufacturing goods for us for decades. So in recent times, okay, so in the last number of decades, say 30, 40 years, or give or take. Okay, so let's look at that in more detail. What are we noticing in these developing countries? Very, very rapid industrial growth. So the setup of factories practically every week, every month over there. Why are they attracting so many MNCs and so many global manufacturing companies? Because they're providing cheap, skilled labour. The cheap labour is the biggest draw, and a big thing with their workers over in those developing countries is they've no unions. Very, very few of them have unions, so there's nobody fighting for workers' rights. So if the boss of the company over there decides they don't want to give you a break, or they want you to work overtime, there's no one fighting for your rights to say no. So because the workers will just go along with whatever the bosses tell them, you get more work done. You're paying them very little, so you're highly profitable. So you can see the attraction for MNCs to locate over there. So what examples of newly industrialised countries are we talking about here? So we're talking about Taiwan, we're talking about Singapore, South Korea and China. So you can see I've pointed out Singapore there, China and Taiwan. South Korea isn't in the map. Okay, so if you remember the names of one of those, China is an obvious newly industrialised country to remember. So you're looking at a factory in South Korea, so quite cramped conditions. Those women would be working long days, very little hours, but it's not the worst factory setting I've seen, to be honest. When we look at, there's a lot of these newly industrialised countries in South America or in Latin America. So Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, they're starting to industrialise quickly too. So they're seeing the setup of a lot of factories, cheap labour. Vietnam, Indonesia and Bangladesh are regions that have come on very, very recently. If we went back, say, 15 years ago, Vietnam, Indonesia and Bangladesh wouldn't have featured very heavily in the manufacturing because they were just extremely poor. But we've seen the setup of a lot of factories there recently because the labour, imagine, is even cheaper there than in China. So Vietnam would be a good example to remember. I think Pennies actually have quite a few factories located in Bangladesh to make their clothes that we are constantly buying. So the only good thing to come out of it, I suppose, is the fact that the factories are setting up in these very, very poor developing countries, is it's creating jobs and it is raising their standard of living, because think of it this way, they are earning a wage. So I suppose that can only be positive. However, they do treat them very, very badly, which we will look at later on. You're probably noticing a lot of women are working in these factories too. That's something that we'll discuss. Or did we discuss that already? I think we might have discussed, women's working conditions. So, not the greatest conditions, but it is a job and it possibly raises their standard of living. So a quick recap, newly industrialised countries, they're in the south, in the developing world, parts of Asia such as China, Mexico. They're attracting factories and MNCs because of low, cheap labour costs. They're earning a wage, they're getting a job, they're raising their standard of living, and Vietnam would be one of the countries to recently come on board and get industrialised. Okay, so you can see a picture of a production line in China and Vietnam. And there I point out Bangladesh, Vietnam and Indonesia for you. So it's good to know these locations. So lots of Asia. Okay, the final region then is industrially emergent regions. So these are regions in the world that have very little or no manufacturing. Okay, so little or no factories will be there. So that's why I put the picture of Africa up, because Africa suffers a lot of wars. So that's not really going to attract factories, is it? Okay. 1 second, I'm trying to move on the next slide. So what are we talking about with industrially emergent regions? They're the least developed countries, so the poorest of the poor. There's very little industry or industrial growth. What's stopping a lot of them from even setting up factories is they were colonised in the past by first world empires. So we know that the likes of England and France and Spain and Portugal went to these parts of the world, in parts of Africa and parts of South America, and they colonised them in the past. And when they colonised them, they left them very, very poor. So what we've noticed is they didn't have the money to set up these factories or to attract these factories in. Okay, and they still depend on producing cheap raw materials for other regions. So they're still very much an agricultural region. And they haven't really moved from agricultural to industrial at all yet. Most parts of Africa, parts of Asia, parts of South America have little or no manufacturing. So try to think of really Africa, if you're trying to think of one example. What's not attracting factories and MNCs over there? Very, very poor transport. How are you supposed to get trucks in with raw materials and trucks out, you know, with finished products to export goods if the transport is so bad? Some parts of Africa haven't even got roads going in and out of towns. It's literally just kind of dirt paths. So it's not possible. Poor road network. Civil war is the biggest thing that would frighten a lot of MNCs from locating there, because it's just so unstable. You don't know if your workers are going to be getting to work safely. Can you get your goods in and out of the country? It's not a good option. They have very, very poor services in many parts of Africa, for example, such as lack of electricity, lack of water supplies. They would get the droughts. Electricity would fail regularly. So that's a non-runner for MNCs. So they've little or no manufacturing, parts of Africa, very poor services, very poor transport, and civil wars. So I hope I've explained that okay. So I do a quick recap here, and I'll send on those pictures to you in Edmodo. Okay, I hope that helps.